Hi all, let's look at another amazing game from the Tradewise Gibraltar tournament of 2018. Levon Aronian, who was the eventual winner of the tournament, played Sharma del Hemant in round 2. Let's have a look at that game. d4, d5, and now bishop f4, so kind of London system, a trendy London system move order without committing to knight f3 just yet. After knight f6, e3, again not committing to knight f3. So if you look at one of my videos, I mentioned this, that sometimes bishop e2 and then maybe even g4, g5 later is possible. Here e6, which closes this bishop, and now actually the decision for knight f3 is played. So this is nicely gripping the dark squares if you look at this structure. That's one big thing about this, especially that e5 square. In fact, black doesn't seem to challenge e5 control at all here with bishop e7, bishop d3, b6, and now knight bd2, bishop b7, and now the knight lunges into e5. It's an aggressive knight. Tartakower once said that a knight on e5 helps for the attacks. It sort of plays itself, an attack plays itself if you can establish a knight on e5. Let's see, a6, white castles, knight bd7, c3, black castles, and now one perk of knight f3 is that f3 square is available to the queen to slide here and then target that soft spot h7 potentially with queen h3, and we see that immediately after knight e8 taking away support of h7. Queen h3 forces a commitment from black which might not be that desirable. f5 is played. This can be used as leverage for g4 later to try and wrench open that g file. But first, the knights reinforce each other. This knight reinforces the one on e5, and in fact black takes, and it's replaced. Knight d6. That e5 square looks like a gaping hole in black's structure at the moment. And you see that these pawns cannot challenge a piece there, whilst white can challenge a piece on e4 with f3. But white dares to play g4 here, knowing that this bishop at the moment is locked by its own pawn structure. So this diagonal, which is a classic downside of a move like g4, isn't so relevant here. c5, king h1. As long as this bishop is under lock and key with its own pawn structure, this operation for the g file would seem worthwhile pursuing. Bishop g5, white takes this. After queen takes, g takes f5, knight takes, and a lovely tempo gain, rook g1, queen e7. Now maybe black thought he's going to be okay here, but there's a nasty shock in store for him. Guess what Levon Aronian plays here if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now. Okay, now normally 2 rooks for a queen would be a good deal, but after rook takes g7, yeah, this is the move. So it looks as though queen takes would at least be 2 rooks for the queen, you'd think. Is that so bad? But before we look at that, let's rule out other possibilities. Knight takes g7 fails miserably to queen takes h7, it's checkmate. That knight's controlling the exit square. King takes, there's check, and this is pretty nasty because there's knight g6 check. That knight is forking king and queen there. That's totally winning. So queen takes g7 is basically forced, but now rook g1, and this is not very nice for black. If queen takes g1 as an example, this is very, very good for white. For example, knight d7, bishop takes f5, and this position is just very tricky. This kind of position is very, very tricky for black. Black's going to end up losing an exchange. For example, this is just a fantasy line where the exchange is lost. Black would have to play rook takes d8, because if rook b6, then queen e7 check, and then knight takes. That's just an example of the knight and queen able to coordinate to win back more material, to win more material there. So this is why it's not a straightforward 2 rooks for queen, why it's actually winning more material. So black actually didn't play queen takes g1, but c takes, rook takes g7, king takes, check, and now bishop takes f5, which means that the d4 square white can capture on d4 with the queen, which happens now. The queen can go to d4. That defender was knocked out, the knight defending d4. So not bothering recapturing a pawn here, by the way. Just straight in for this lethal looking knight f7 double check, which would lead to mate here if not addressed properly. So for example, if e takes, then double check, and then knight h6 is checkmate. So rook takes is important here for black to play on a bit, but the double check happens anyway, and after knight h6 winning the exchange, this queen is overpowering the rook and bishop in this position, and black was convinced the trend would be for white's favour and resigned here. So it looks like a very simple but instructive game, the way white played it. Black maybe made some fundamental mistakes at some point, allowing the g-file to be opened up, but nevertheless a really instructive demonstration of how a knight on e5 can be a prelude to a pretty vicious attack without too much counterplay being offered by black here in this game. Black was, by the way, an international master, so no easy walkover. But Levon, of course, is a super grandmaster, and he made it look a little bit easy, it seems. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.